The reading for this morning is taken from the book of Matthew, chapter 5, reading verses 1 to 12. Matthew 5, verses 1 to 12. The Beatitudes. Now when he saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. May God bless this reading of his word.
Just a quick comment about the picnic yesterday. I want to express appreciation to Wayne and Cheryl for hosting the event. It's always a great time out at their place. They have lots of room, and they put a lot of work in. I know there are a lot of people that help them. And also to acknowledge Ray Kazuk and his crew, who did their best to try to leave a crater in Wayne and Cheryl's front yard. I was talking with Ray. His comment was that the finale of his fireworks show was 100 times better than he hoped it would be. So you can kind of figure out what that might mean. It was apparently quite something. We had to leave just right before the end, so What I'd like us to do this morning is to think about what we crave. Now, as I was working on my lesson, I thought, okay, well, I'll check and see what the internet might have to say about cravings. And of course, when we talk about cravings, we tend to be talking about things that we want to eat or drink, right? And they kind of break it down into certain categories. And I know it's not wise to show you these pictures right now because you're going to be thinking about food. But they kind of break it down into one of the things we crave is salty, right? One of the other things, it's funny, I was talking with somebody about the idea of cravings, and this is the first thing they mentioned. Chocolate. Sweet. It's kind of the category that they use to describe it. And I was kind of surprised, but not surprised, because I know this characteristic for me is spicy or savory. But then as I looked at this list, I thought, there's something that is really missing here. I don't know about you, but when I get up in the morning, I'm looking for that first cup of coffee. And the second, and we do have, very definite things that we crave. There are things that can become very important. We joke about the fact that people in certain positions in life will have cravings and look to try to satisfy those by what they eat. We crave other things. There are people that crave entertainment. There are people that crave getting online to their social media. And they can't live without getting that. And I think it's so interesting now. You go out and, in public, and you go to the mall or you go to the restaurant, and you see a group of people sitting there, not just young people, and they've all got their devices out, and they're, I wonder how many of them are talking to each other on their device. But we're told that people are addicted, not just craving the social media and the devices. We're going to talk about a passage this morning that has the idea of craving built into it. It's from the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5, chapter 6, chapter 7. Tell us a good part of what Jesus said. I think one of the things we have to realize is that it's quite likely that Jesus may have said more, but these were the points, the main points that he was making, and so they were shared. That there was a large crowd following him, and so he decides to go up on the mountain, and he sits down and he begins to teach. The people are amazed at his teaching. That there's something different about what he's saying, because he's not teaching like the teachers of the law. You know, teachers of the law would be quoting other teachers of the law. Jesus was teaching like one with authority. You know, it's like you're getting it from the source, not just from people who are talking about it. So he begins with this section that Leonard just read for us that we referred to as the Beatitudes. And each one begins with the word blessed. And, you know, we understand that the word blessed has the idea of happy. Unfortunately, when we use the word happy, we think of it as a kind of a temporary emotional type of thing. But there's more substance to that in the way Jesus is using the word. So you might even use the word fortunate. You know, that this is not just a momentary thing, but this is a positive condition of their life. This is what it means to be living in God's kingdom and under his rule. And we're not going to go through all 12 verses, but we want to focus on one in particular. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. It's an interesting passage or statement, but what is Jesus talking about? You know, most of us can quote that passage, and most of us have some kind of an impression about what he means. You know, I don't know where it came from, but pretty much through my early years, I associated this with the desire or interest of people in God's Word. And that may be part of it, but I don't think that's all of it. I think there's a larger idea that we need to be aware of. Now, we start with the idea of hunger and thirst. That's why I wanted to think about the word crave. You know, that I like the way Jack Lewis put it in his commentary here, just noting that hunger and thirst are among the strongest drives known to man. If you think about being out in a desert, I was talking with somebody the other day, Diana and I, first summer after we got married. You know, we were in Abilene, Texas, and we were going out to be at a friend's wedding, and actually both bride and groom were friends. I was going out to be in a wedding in California, and we planned, okay, we're gonna drive all night from Abilene to California. You know, it's a long drive. You know, it's like driving here to BC. Get you a sense of geography here. And I've got to admit, I did not plan it right, because we wound up with that all-night drive in eastern California, which is desert, called the Salton Desert. And we were driving in the Salton Desert in the heat of the afternoon in August in a car with no air conditioning. And we were miserable. You know, and when you get that miserable, there's a couple of things that really kind of cross your mind. You know, most especially it's thirst. Need to drink. Well, the thing is, as you're doing this, you know, that what you've got to drink has gotten warm, and it's just water. You know, that thirst and hunger in a situation that are very powerful. But, you know, that's kind of an occasional type of thing. Jesus is talking about something that is more lasting. It's something that would be part of a characteristic of a person's life. It's a focus. It's a priority. You know, that the hunger and thirst for righteousness, as he's talking about it, is not something that just comes and goes. It's something that really drives us through our lives. I mean, you think about it. You can't have this fortunate state that Jesus is talking about if it's just kind of coming and going off and on and off and on. It doesn't work. Got to be something more to it. But then we realize this is not a physical appetite. It's not something that you would consume. Even though he uses the image of eating and drinking, it's not a commodity. Because food has a transient or passing nature. You know, one of the things that you think about is that while we invest a lot of attention in our food, don't we? And it's consumed, it's gone. Isaiah says, "Come, all of you who are thirsty, come to the waters, and you who have no money, come buy and eat." And you kind of think, wait a minute, if I don't have any money, how can I buy and eat? Because he's not talking about physical food that needs physical money. Come buy wine and milk without money and without cost. Why spend money on what is not bread, and your labor on what does not satisfy? Now think about how much of our lives is invested in going after things. I made a choice in getting this together. At the picnic, there's always a scramble. Actually, there's two. There's one for the kids and one for the adults. And the yard is strewn with all kinds of things. And there's a lineup of adults there and kids. With the kids, it's mainly candy. But with the adults, there's all kinds of things. There were a couple of coffee makers out there. And we got some people thinking, oh, man, I should have gone. No. There was a computer printer. But there was wrapping paper and packages of napkins, and the adults did get some candy. But it was interesting when the word go was yelled, and suddenly there's this horde of people running across the lawn grabbing things. And you're thinking, you know, it's part of it I think is just the fun of the chaos of the crowd going for the stuff. So I took pictures, but I'm not posting them. But it's kind of like, you know, we go after the things, don't we? You know, I wonder what would happen if I said, I put a $100 bill down here on the, I didn't, but if I said, put a $100 bill down here on the platform, and once we have the closing prayer, first person up here can get it. I don't want to be up here, right? Because we go after the things. But what happens is the things, Jesus talks in the Sermon on the Mount, next chapter, about laying up treasures. And he says, don't lay up treasures on earth where moth and rust corrupt and thieves break in and steal. You know, everything here is temporary. It's not permanent. It doesn't last. And so Isaiah is saying, why spend money on what is not bread and labor on what does not satisfy? We can chase and pursue and accumulate. But ultimately, it really doesn't change anything. And the important word here, it doesn't satisfy. Listen. Listen to me. Eat what is good, and you will delight in the richest of fare. Well, what is that? Well, down in verse 6. Seek the Lord while he may be found. Call on him while he's near. See, what we need to be pursuing in life is not the things that are momentary and fleeting. You know, I always like to think of the image. You know, Dinah and I had 4 kids, and now we've got the grandkids, and you see this with the other little ones at church. You see a little child with a ball, right? I love that great big beach ball kind of a thing. And you see the little one, the toddler, going after the ball, and they start chasing it. And as soon as they get close to it, what happens? They kick it. They didn't mean to kick it, but that foot just kind of bumps it, or maybe even the hand bumps it, and it goes further away. And the harder they chase the ball, the more it eludes them. And that's kind of the way it is with our things, is ultimately they're not going to satisfy. That it's going to be empty and futile and frustrating. So the object of hunger and thirst, Jesus says, it's not blessed are those who hunger and thirst. It's those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Wonder what would happen if you went into a restaurant and said, I'll have a cup of righteousness. Well, it doesn't work that way, does it? But we understand if I sit down and order a cup of coffee, I drink the coffee, the cup is gone. I think it's Leonard that likes to say, when the cup is gone, say to the server, there's a hole in the bottom of my cup, it's empty. The psalmist put it this way. As the deer pants for streams of water, so my soul pants for you, O God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. See, the hunger and thirsting Jesus has in mind is not just about things, not about what we consume. It's righteousness. Now, you might think, okay, well, what is righteousness? All right, kind of by definition, it's right conduct living, as it's often put. You know, Jesus talked about, he says, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you'll not enter the kingdom of heaven. See, righteousness is part of our life. Righteousness is obedience to God. Righteousness is conformity with his word. You know, in other words, that idea of hungering and thirsting after righteousness as being related to God's word, I think is partly true, that as God's people, we should be, we want to be, hungering and thirsting for his word, don't we? But even more, it is characteristic of God himself. It's that light that we refer to as being God, that not physically light, but the way Paul puts it is that light consists of all goodness, righteousness, and truth. That hungering and thirsting for righteousness is that desire to be with, to be like, to share in the very nature of God, and to have that relationship with God. We want God in our lives. You know, one of the things as I look at this statement Jesus made here in the Beatitudes is that blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. The word righteousness, as it's translated, the root word there in the Greek actually means justice. And that's kind of interesting because you look at our world and we get really frustrated, don't we? Because we see injustice around us. Same thing with Jesus' world. It was filled with injustice. And our indignation is there. We're not, you know, are you satisfied with our political system? Are you satisfied with what's happening in our courts? Are you satisfied with what's happening in our culture? No. But that's not what Jesus is promising, is it? What he's talking about is the desire for God. That those who hunger and thirst for God will be filled. And even if you ask the word satisfied here, you know, in some ways that doesn't really, because we have this tension between our desire for good and right in the world around us. You know, I find that I can hardly turn on the news or read the newspaper or look at the news on the internet and not find not just a story, but a number of stories that just fuel my indignation about injustice in the world, about the poor being treated badly and poorly, about violence, about terrorism. And if I fed on that, I'd be really frustrated all the time. But Jesus is not talking about controlling our circumstances by that desire, because that's just not going to happen. You know, Jesus talked about the idea, you know, in John to the disciples. He said, in the world, you will have trouble. In me, you'll have peace. We can't escape the world and its troubles, but we can find a center. And therefore, we fill our lives. And that kind of begins with filling our minds with good. So, when Jesus says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled, that our hunger, our thirst is for God. And if we really want and seek Him, His promises will find Him. You know, when I think about something like this, I always think about the story of the Ethiopian who's traveling along in the wilderness in the chariot reading from Isaiah 55. He's hungry for God. And God brings Philip to him to share with him the story of Jesus and his death on the cross for sin as a fulfillment of that very passage that he's been reading. You know, God has a way of bringing people who hunger for Him to those who can share Him. What do you crave? What are you hungry for? Thirsty for? Is it for the fleeting, temporary pleasures of the world? Or is it for the eternal substance of God? His character in the book of Psalms. As the deer pants for the water. And as we're singing this song, hopefully you can sing that song from your heart, that you want God first, foremost, as the priority of your life. If you can't sing it that way, we encourage you to find out and learn what you need to do to get your life right with Him. And you can talk with me or with Chad or one of the elders after. Let's stand as we sing.